Hi, I'm Kenny Burdine, Associate Extension Professor of Livestock Economics at the University of Kentucky Department of Agricultural Economics. Today I'm going to talk about answering a question that I get from a lot of fairly new beef producers. They ask me why there's a differential between what Kentucky feeder cattle prices sell for and what they see feeder cattle prices sell for in some other states. Good question, and there's a lot of reasons why. This is part of our Beef Business Foundations for New Beef Producer series that is funded by the Kentucky Ag Development Board through the Kentucky Beef Network. Any additional resources or any source of information that are in addition to this will be put in the comments section below the video. There are really two major reasons why Kentucky cattle prices tend to be lower than the prices for similar types of cattle in some of the other major cattle producing states. The first one is simply a function of location. I want to start by showing you a map of where beef cows are located in the United States. We tend to see beef cattle across the entire U.S., but in three major areas. The first area being the Southern Plains, think Texas, Oklahoma, that part of the country. The second area being the Northern Plains, think Montana, the Dakotas, and so forth. And then third, kind of being the Southeast, kind of think Kentucky, Tennessee, and then kind of south from there. That's where the beef cows are located. Now, if you compare that to where the feedlots are located or where cattle on feed are, the story changes. So notice on this map, when I'm looking at where cattle on feed are, we see some pretty major changes. We see the concentration of cattle on feed moving towards the major corn producing areas. We kind of see it shifting towards the heart of the Corn Belt some. So take the Southeast, for example, Kentucky in particular. We've got a whole lot of cows in Kentucky and a whole lot of calves that are born, but the vast majority of them are going to move west. They're going to be finished in one of those major cattle feeding areas. So when you think about how this impacts the value of those cattle, just put yourself in the shoes of a feed yard in Kansas or Nebraska or Oklahoma. When I teach this in class, I say I'm going to simplify the world. There's two groups of cattle for sale this week. One group is a few miles down the road, the other is in Kentucky. What has to be true about those cattle in Kentucky before that feed yard is going to buy them instead of buying the ones that are close by? The answer is they have to be cheaper. They have to be cheap enough that they can be bought and the transportation costs can be covered to bring those cattle to that feed yard and still deal with things like stress and shrink and those kind of things that go with that transportation. So for that reason, holding everything else constant, if I have the exact same group of cattle that runs through an auction yard in Kentucky and one in Kansas, the ones in Kentucky are going to tend to sell for less because where they're located. Transportation costs being the reason why. Transportation costs have got to be reflected in the form of a lower price here in Kentucky because those cattle are going to ultimately move to those cattle feeding areas to be finished. Now, the second reason that we see this differential, and sometimes why it seems very wide at times, has to do with how many cattle tend to be sold at one time through auction yards. I'm going to start by defining a simple term, lot size. Lot size refers to the number of cattle that run through a yard in one given cut. Sometimes a single head may run through the yards. Sometimes it may be 10 or 12. Sometimes it may be 2 or 3 potloads in one cut. But that impacts their price. Generally speaking, the more cattle that are sold at one time, the higher their price tends to be. That's what lot size is. What I'm showing you right now is really, one result from a pretty extensive study that Greg Halich and I did back in 2015. We looked at lots of factors that impacted feeder cattle prices, and we used several years worth of data from Bluegrass Stockyards, CPH 45, preconditioned feeder cattle sales. Understand that in this study, we tried to hold everything constant that could have impacted differentials in price between these groups of feeder cattle. So we held constant feed prices. We held constant fed cattle market. We held constant the weight of the cattle. We held constant what kind of cattle they were. We held constant seasonality the month that they sold. And the chart that I'm showing you just looks at one factor. How did lot size, the number of cattle that moved through the ring at one time, how did that impact sale price? I'm going to start with the two extremes. So first of all, look in the lower left-hand corner, kind of where the origin there almost of the chart. that's a lot size of 1. That's a single. That's one head going through the yards at a time, a single. On the far right, the upper end of the chart, that's roughly a truckload lot. The average weight of the cattle in the study was something like 625 to 630 pounds. Okay, so the far right is roughly 50,000 pounds, or what a semi-truck would hold. So let's start with the extremes. Holding everything else constant, in this particular study, a truckload of feeder cattle outsold a single by about $21 per hundredweight, or 21 cents a pound. That's pretty significant. There's good evidence that higher lot sizes lead to higher prices. So, if lot size were the same between cattle that sold in Kentucky and cattle that sold in some of the major cattle finishing areas, the only difference we might see would probably be transportation cost. But in Kentucky, because a lot of cow-calf operators tend to be smaller, they tend to sell cattle in smaller groups, and they tend to sell lower, smaller lot sizes. So we see more cattle in Kentucky kind of towards the left end of that chart that I'm showing you. Now, when I look at this, I always think about what does it really mean for cow-calf operators, for producers. I think the first thing to understand is I don't have to be selling load lots of feeder cattle to get the majority of that benefit in terms of price. So sure, the differential between a single and a load lot may have been 21 bucks a hundredweight. But as I start moving from the left side up that line, each one of those circles is 5 head. So the first one is a group of 5. Second one's a group of 10, 15, 20, and so on. So notice, for example, if I go to a group of 10 outsells a single by 15 bucks a hundredweight. So I get over 70% of the load lot price benefit if I sell a group of 10. A group of 5 outsells a single by 11 bucks a hundredweight. So even if I'm just selling groups of 5, I'm getting about half of the load lot price benefit. Okay, so a bit of a sidebar, but as I talk to cow-calf operators in Kentucky, and even smaller stocker and feedless, stocker and backgrounding operations, the point that I oftentimes make is anything we can do to improve the uniformity of our cattle is going to enhance our price because fewer of them are going to get sold in these smaller groups. If I'm a cow-calf operator and I unload, 15, 20 head of cattle at the stockyards on a given day, okay, some are going to be steers, some are going to be heifers. There's going to be a natural spread between their weights as well. And the yards are going to be looking to put those cattle into groups to maximize what they're going to bring. And they're not going to want too much difference in weight and too much difference in how those cattle look across those groups. So anything that I can do to have more of my cattle stay together when they're sold, the further up the right on that chart I'm going to move. The real story isn't that I've got to be moving truckload lots of feeder cattle. That would be great. It's not practical. The real story is I've got to find ways to move to stay out of the lower left-hand corner. Singles, groups of 2 and 3 are difficult for buyers to work with. Groups of 5 and 10, although still small, really do make a big difference in terms of price. So calf uniformity, calving distribution, things like that are going to help me get more of my cattle stay together in the stockyards and are going to benefit my price over time. So again, there's 2 main reasons why Kentucky feeder cattle prices, and pretty much for all the Southeast for that matter, tend to be lower than feeder cattle prices in the major cattle feeding areas. The first is location, transportation cost. Most of those cattle are going to leave the Southeast and move to those cattle feeding areas, so transportation cost tends to get reflected in those prices. And then secondly is lot size. There's really good evidence that more cattle that sell together at one time bring higher prices, and we tend to sell a lot of small groups of feeder cattle here in Kentucky and in the Southeast. Location and lot size are the 2 main reasons. They're important for new beef producers to understand as they think about developing their business.